Welcome back to the Black Tape. I'm Greg Carr, your host here on the Black Star Network. Every Friday, we spend an hour exploring ideas and subjects of special importance to Black people and others fighting to build a better society. Now, if you've been following us, then you know that in the tradition of folks like Gil Noble, Lister Bell Middleton, and others, we gather elders who have had an incredible impact on our people and on society, thinkers, folks still working, and who are continue to contribute. And we put them in conversation, in an intergenerational conversation with our HBCU master teachers, with our legal roundtable, with authors and others. And over the arc of our program so far, we've had folks like Adolph Reed and Abdullah Kalimat and Andrew Amy Billingsley and Robert Smith. Well, today we want to continue that and to enhance it. The name of this program is The Black Table. Well, we thought we might spend some time with someone who can help us understand what we mean when we say Black. For many people viewing today, this will be your first listening session with a legit, as the young people would say, an actual Black philosopher. Now, he's going to probably quickly tell us that Black folk have been doing philosophy for a long time, but this is a man with a PhD in it at a time when there were very few, and there's still not enough. So joining us today at the Black Table, one of the great minds of our time, the great Lucius Turner Outlaw Senior. I'm sorry, yeah, senior, right? Right. Nope. Father, no, your son is the third, so you're junior.
I'm junior.
That's right. That's right. I always want to say when I say the Turner, it messes me up. But in fact, you contributed your son to the faculty of Howard University. He's up here with us, isn't he, Prof?
That's right, at the law school. That's right, and he's loving it. He's loving it. It's been good for him.
Absolutely, and the students love him. The students love him. So for those, go ahead, Prof. I'm sorry. What'd you say?
I was just going to say, I told him, if you convince your students that you love them, you can make very high demands on them, and they will do their best to live up to your demands. Absolutely. He's loving it.
Absolutely.
He's loving it.
Between you and your wife, certainly his first teachers certainly took that instruction by watching you all, because everybody at the Howard University School of Law who have been his students, Lucius III, have said that he is indeed a master teacher. So he learned from the best. So I expect there will be nothing less.
Thank you. Thank you much. And thank you for having me and honoring me by asking me to be at the Black Table.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure, brother. It's our honor. For those who are not familiar with Dr. Outlaw, he's the Joseph Johnson Distinguished Leadership Professor at Vanderbilt University. W. Alton Jones Professor of Philosophy in the Department of Philosophy, and also the Department of African American and Diaspora Studies, and of Human and Organizational Development at Peabody College. So Vanderbilt and Peabody, of course, part of the same institution. He joined the faculty about 22 years ago. Before that, and when many of us met him, he was the T. Worcester Brown Professor of Philosophy at Haverford College, right outside of Philadelphia. And those of us from the South, you know, it might as well say Philly. It's right in the area. And
that's right.
His area,
that's right.
You know, we don't do them suburbs. Like, well, this is all part of the same town.
Just an extension of West Philly.
No question. Professor Outlaw writes and teaches about everything from race and ethnicity to American philosophy, African American and Africana philosophy, critical social theory, the history of philosophy. He is the author of 2 collected works, volumes on race and philosophy from 1996, and critical social theory in the interests of Black folk from 2005. But he has a number of other publications in addition to that. A son of Mississippi, Starkville, Mississippi. He is a graduate of Fisk University, Phi Beta Kappa, and also, as I said, Boston College, where he got his PhD in philosophy in 1972. Prof, I want to start with a question. You know, since COVID has started, so many of us have moved online in these spaces, and you gave an interview that has been circulated widely with Philip McReynolds, a philosopher. I think he's at UNC, if not familiar. And you made a comment, and I think I wrote it down actually. You said, yeah, people of African descent, starting particularly with enslavement and oppression in the Americas, in the United States in particular, were compelled
to philosophize about the most fundamental issues, like, who am I?
Well, who are you? From coming out of Mississippi and shaped by Black institutions before you ever showed up at Fisk, and in a craft where very few African people were in the late 1960s, and trying to reconcile that craft with that emerging field of Black studies. Do you mind a little bit about who you are and how you came to be who you are?
Well, you know, that's a great question, Greg. And, you know, my life has been impacted in ways I never anticipated by way of my matriculation to Fisk University in 1963. A bunch of my classmates and I celebrated the 55th anniversary of our graduation a few weeks ago. And we all shared that we had no idea what we were getting into, no idea how our lives would be impacted by going to FISC. Now, for me, one of the commitments I had made to myself as I was approaching graduation from high school was that I didn't want to go to school in Mississippi. I wanted out. I simply, I had spent some time at a number of HBCUs in Mississippi. I knew about Mary Holmes Junior College was nearby. I had been to Valley State. I'd been to Jackson State on a number of occasions. A lot of my hometown people went to Jackson, went to Alcorn, went to Valley State. A few even went to Tougaloo, private school down in Jackson.
Yes.
I didn't want to be in Mississippi. I wanted out of Mississippi. And my original intent was to go to TSU. Now,
State.
Yes, that was my original. One of my best friends had a brother who had gone to Tennessee State.
Huh.
And so that's how I knew something about Tennessee State. Now, part of my background is I was a young preacher in high school, and I went to go study religion and philosophy. And there was a young brother from the Starkville area who was studying at American Baptist College Seminary.
Yes.
We happened to be talking one day, and I was telling him what I had hoped to do it. He says, well, you're not going to be able to study religion and philosophy at Tennessee State, but you can do it at this other place called Fisk University. I didn't know anything about Fisk. So I wrote and got a catalog and started reading up on it. And he says, by the way, the other thing about Fisk, they got the most beautiful Black women in the world there. I was like, okay.
And you wrote about the fact that you were able to confirm what Du Bois
I confirmed that.
generations before.
And
that too, didn't he?
Yeah, and I tell people, Du Bois, I had the same experience with Du Bois. The first time, my freshman year, when all the upper class women and students came back and I went to the dining hall that first Sunday.
Yes.
I'd never seen anything like it. I couldn't even eat. It was so astounding. But Fisk was a place. Now remember the national movement was still underway when I got to Fisk in 1963.
Yes.
So this was a major happening in and around campus and around things. Now my parents told me, don't get involved, don't get involved, don't get involved. They were afraid of what happened to me. They were afraid of what could happen to them if word got back that I was involved in the movement. They were really afraid of, losing jobs and danger to them. And I stood one day on campus as students were marching off from in the middle of campus, go back out to demonstrate. They were demonstrating on Morrison's over on West End.
Yes.
And I stood there and cried because I couldn't go. And I made the commitment to myself. I said, well, if I can't be out here in the street, I'm going to find a way to make my contribution to this effort.
Yes, sir.
And one of the things about Fisk that impressed me was there were all these faculty living on campus. And I'm looking at this saying, this isn't just a job. This is their life. This is how they live.
Absolutely.
And there were young men around, young men who had PhDs even in their 20s. And I was like, I want to do that too. I want to live like this too. And I made a decision that I want to become a college or university teacher at a place like Fisk.
That's remarkable.
And that my work as a teacher would be to contribute as best I could to that ongoing struggle. Now, another element of that was my senior year. Every spring, Fisk had an annual fine arts festival.
Mm-hmm.
And each spring, they would bring to campus a huge gathering of some of the best minds in the Black world.
Mm-hmm.
Lerone Bennett, Gwendolyn Brooks, John Oliver Killens was writer in residence at the time.
Yes.
Amira Baraka, Ron Welburn, a young Dardell Lee who became Hakeem Matabuti. I mean, all these people were coming to campus for this week-long thing, and they would be having symposia and conferences and speeches and whatever. And you were expected to go to as many of those as you possibly can, every day, every night, etc.
It's about you all. This is the living archive. There are folks out there. If you want to trace just a glimpse of this, go back to the old Negro Digest, which became the Black World. You will see reports from the Fisk conferences, but that just gives you a look. What we get now, this is what what Hampate Ba in West Africa calls the living tradition. A little bit later on, Prof, we're going to ask you about genealogy. And so when you want to know the roots of Black studies, it's a living tradition. Prof, we're about 10 minutes in. Can we take a moment, a pause, and when we come back, you pick up exactly where you are, because you're about to help us walk across this bridge to how you entered into the field of philosophy.
All right.
In the interest of Black folk. So thank you, Prof. So when we return, we are going to continue with Professor Lucius T. Outlaw Jr. and our discussion of Blackness and philosophy here at the Black Table.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jackie Hood Martin, and I have a question for you. Ever feel as if your life is teetering and the weight and pressure of the world is consistently on your shoulders? Well, let me tell you, living a balanced life isn't easy. Join me each Tuesday on Black Star Network for A Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie. We'll laugh together, cry together, pull ourselves together, and cheer each other on. So join me for new shows each Tuesday on Black Star Network, A Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie.
Welcome back to the Black Table on the Black Star Network. Greg Carr, and we are joined today with Professor Lucius T. Outlaw Jr., Vanderbilt University, son of Mississippi. He is walking us through his formative years at Fisk. Prof, when we left, you were you were on the verge of helping us think with you as a young man entered this conversation with these folk who come from all over the country and the world having these conversations. Was this the year you were student body president?
This was the year I was student government president, my senior year. And one of the similar moments is Amiri Baraka gave a talk in the Appleton Room one night. And I sat there and I listened to that talk. It was stunning. When it was over, after the question asked, I waited around until I could go up, shake his hand and thank him. And what I said to Baraka that night was, I may have come to this university as a Negro, but I will leave as a Black man. That's how powerful. Now, also that as president of student government, I had been in an intense struggle with a group of students, Nick Giovanni and others, who were trying to get a chapter of SNCC on campus, and the administration didn't want it to happen. It was a very intense struggle. That's another long throw. And one night after meeting, Nick and them had been in the student government during the meeting, calling us everything but a child of God. We were lapdogs for the white people downtown. You just a hank-of-the-head Negro, blah, blah, blah.
What? But didn't she know that if I remember correctly, didn't you campaign on representing students? She knew better than that. I had been elected, denounced during the campaign speeches by one candidate. I had been denounced as a radical. Now here we are, 10 months later, I'm being denounced as a handkerchief Uncle Tom. And this
so
real life school days. Y'all seen
right?
these school days. Now you see it real time, a generation before. The HBCU, brother.
Right. So I lead that meeting. We've been in this meeting arguing for 2 or 3 hours. I walk out of that meeting. I'm standing in the hallway. I'm exhausted. I'm emotionally wrung out. Nikki walks out of that room, walks up to me. I'm standing in the hallway, leaning against the wall. Nikki walks up to me, kisses me on the cheek and says, Lou, we love you, and walked away.
My God.
I was so confused. And I got to, this past October, Nikki was brought back to give the Jubilee Day keynote address, and I introduced her, and I began by saying it was a strange kiss from Nikki that day. And the people were like, where is this going?
Right.
And it took me years to understand that Nikki was saying to me, this isn't personal.
Right.
This isn't personal.
Right.
And I was thinking it was personal. It was like, this isn't personal. It's a political struggle, but we love you, and walked away, And it took me years, but that was part of the orientation. When I went to graduate school and had to decide on a dissertation, that dissertational focus opens with that quote from the Soldier Black Folk about double consciousness.
Yes.
And the point of my dissertation was to make an argument that with the transformation of consciousness from colored and Negro to Black, the divided consciousness was being resolved. And that was the effort I was trying to make in my dissertation.
And that's what you do. You know, it's interesting that you say that, Prof, because as I said before we went live, we had a conversation a little over a month ago with another friend of yours, Adolph Reed Jr. And then you showed us that you, in fact, have read and are reading the book that we asked him about, The South, and both of you sons of the South. This concept he talked about, and that you have talked about for many years and have written about, you know, coming to Fisk, that wasn't your introduction to Black institutions. The young people call it Black excellence. Sometimes some of us say, well, it's excellence in Black. You came from that high academic standard. I think I remember you saying you saw the son of one of the trustees get sent home for bad academic.
That's right.
First semester. That's when you realize, no, but carrying that expansive concept of Blackness into your work at Boston, a Blackness so expansive that regardless of politics, realizing that we are Black people, as you undertook that work and that produced the language and the transformation of consciousness, your dissertation, reading through it, looking at its footnotes, you've got Harold Cruz and John Bracy, you got James Turner and so many others, but then you've also got Heidegger, you got Hegel. How are you grappling with this question of Blackness and beingness in a field like philosophy where there were so few people at the time? And what drove you into that field, Prof?
Well, you know, it's an interesting question, because part of it was, so in coming to Fisk, majoring in philosophy and religion, I'm reading, you know, and I tell people, from my undergraduate years at Fisk all the way through my PhD, I was never in a philosophy class where I had a professor who was a person of African descent, nor assigned a text written by a person of African descent, ever, never, not in any course I ever took from my undergraduate through my graduate years in philosophy did I ever read a text written by a Black person. So
your master teachers, I mean, you mentioned, of course, the great L.C. Collins, who only made transition very recently.
But his class, see, I had him as a first semester freshman. And in my senior year, before I graduated from Fisk, I made sure that I took his Negro literature class. So that's where I did a lot of reading, but it wasn't happening in philosophy.
You didn't get any of what you bring to philosophy from philosophy.
Nope.
You got it from Black traditions outside. Oh, this is fascinating. Right. Please go ahead. Right. Go ahead, Bobby.
That's right. So while I'm in graduate school, I go to this lecture one night. Big crowd of people there. This man gives his lecture. I'm like, my goodness, what is this? And I come out and there's people selling his books. And I go buy one and I'm blown away by the sheer title of this book, because the title is The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual.
Come on. Not Harold Cruz. You heard Cruz.
I heard Cruz went and got that book, and I'm trying to think about how to be an intellectual. This man is talking about the crisis. I'm like, oh, Lord.
Exactly.
I go read this. Right now, I meet Harold Cruz later on, and we have some really interesting conversation, but that was a seminal text. And later, in the December of 1968, I go over at Harvard Square, browsing through bookstores. I go in this bookstore, and I look over on a rack, and I see something that just stops me dead in my track. Because there's a journal in a rack that has a title. I had never seen those two words put together. The Black Scholar.
Wow.
It was the first issue of the journal.
Really? Nathan Hare.
And right. I'm looking at this going, what the hell? Black and Scholar?
Right.
So Harold Cruz, Christ of the Negro Intellectual, the Black Scholar. I've been caught up in this whole Black consciousness, Black power thing, having to rethink my way. And so I've got to find, and I've got this commitment. I'm not going to be in the street. I'm going to try to be inside these educational institutions. I want to be a teacher, but I got to arm myself to do this. So my dissertation is fundamentally drawing off of particularly Du Bois and Fanon. The language thing is coming straight out of his chapter, The Negro and Language, in one of his texts. All this other stuff is to help me make this case, et cetera, for how to prepare myself to continue inside the academy, working in a discipline where there ain't nothing about Black folk, but I'm seeing what's happening in politics, history, sociology, etc., right? Where a whole lot of people are talking about Black sociology, Black history, Black literature, Black music, Black. So then me and a bunch of other people are saying, okay, we got to do Black philosophy then. And of course, the discipline is like, there's no such thing. We're like, yeah, we're going to make it be such a thing.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because, you know, they're in the late 60s and you've written about the death of King, how that impacted you, and so many other things going on at the time. As you carry that momentum into the 70s, you turn down a job at Boston. They say, we usually don't do internal stuff, but we want you to stay. Right. You feel compelled to go back to Fisk and join that faculty. And as I told you before, I mean, for you to draft the dissertation, the one you wrote in a matter of months, is, to me, I think anybody who's ever written one would have to sit back and say, what the hell? But why do you decide not to enjoy or pursue the life of a scholar, which is usually a very singular, solitary life, very insular? But as you say, you join with this wave of like-minded, unfortunately, men with one, I think it was one woman you mentioned, but you all come together and eventually produce this Philosophy Born of Struggle collective. You join together. Then you began cultivating over the years another generation with like the racial theory, group formations. Why was it, and why is it so important for you that your intellectual work is driven by teaching and community engagement and work? And what was it like in the 70s and 80s to find like-minded Black folk and move forward as a collective rather than just like these heroic individuals?
Well, I mean, again, remember, so much of the Black consciousness, Black power movement was in social terms. It wasn't in individualistic terms. And so it was about being part of some social group. You know, there's a lot of talk about revolution. One of the essays in Harold Cruz's book, Reform and Revolution, and he said in one of them, said, you know, you young folk want to talk about revolution, but if you really understood what it was about, you stop talking about it, because this is serious business.
Yes, sir.
And so I became clear that I wasn't going, I was reading Marxist and left stuff, but I understood I wasn't going to be out in the street with no gun, right?
Right.
I was committed to education. I was committed to the notion that education could make a difference. And I got called back to Fisk. I didn't even apply for a job at Fisk. I was called and told to apply for this job. I had been interviewing at Mississippi State in my hometown. That's another story. I came and did an interview. When I got to go meet with the president of Fisk, President James Lawson, I went to his office. Secretary called and told him I was there. He got up and met me at the door. When I walked into his office, he reached out and shook my hand. And he said to me, Lucius, you're coming back to Fisk. That's settled. I hear you have a wife. You're married. What's your wife's name? That began my conversation with the president.
Now that's old school. That's some old school HBCU presidents who built faculties like that.
That's right. And he says, and during the conversation, he says, now we've got these apartments over here for faculty. I want you and your wife to live in these apartments over here. He wanted us to be, the whole time he was in the, even before he was president of Fisk, he lived on the Fisk campus.
Yes, sir.
So did many of them. And he says, I want you to live on this campus.
Well, I'm from Nashville. As kids, we knew, the John Wesley Workhouse, Arnold Brown House, all them cats.
That's right.
A couple of streets down, even though he wasn't a member of the Fisk faculty, the Nashville legend, of course, the great Avon
Williams. That's right. Right around the corner on Marina Street.
Yes, sir. Right? Go down Jefferson Street, and then the state faculty is right there. So,
right. And so this whole thing of living and being part of a community, and that has been lost at Fisk. But all of that was powerful in shaping of me. And the other thing was that I had learned during the Nashville riots, as a senior president of student government, what the important difference was for Fisk as a private institution compared to TSU as a state.
Yes.
Because I had learned as a freshman, students could participate in the movement, go put in jail, knowing that the dean or president was going to go make bail and they'd be out and back out again. Nobody was getting put out of Fisk for participating in the movement. They were being supported for participating in the movement, not chastised or don't do this. You were expected to be about that kind of thing. You were expected to go forth into the world and comport yourself in a certain kind of way as a graduate of Fisk University, as literally one of the responsible talented 10.
That's amazing, because as you said, they put those kids out of A&I. They put them out. Right. They didn't get their degrees until recently, even right. And I think about, of course, your homies, the great Joyce and Dory Ladner,
That's right.
Jackson State they had to go to Tougaloo.
That's right.
The public
That's right.
HBCU, you couldn't do it.
Wasn't having it.
Let's pause here for a second, and when we come back on the other end of the break, I hope you will help us think about and think through your work, not only as an intellectual and but as an activist, as a community-grounded scholar, and how that has impacted not only the field of Black philosophy, but the way we think about, and to use the title of your second book, critical theory, critical social theory in the interest of Black folk. So we'll be back in a moment. Greg Carr on the Black Star Network with the Black Table. We are honored to be joined today by Professor Lucius T. Outlaw Jr. Back in a moment.
We're all impacted by the culture, whether we know it or not. From politics to music and entertainment, it's a huge part of our lives, and we're going to talk about it every day right here on The Culture with me, Faraji Muhammad, only on the Black Star Network.
Back at the Black Table. Here we are every week. We have these conversations around Blackness and around social justice and related issues. And today we are honored to be joined by Professor Lucius Outlaw, and we are discussing his intellectual journey and his work and how he has helped us and continues to help us think about the question of what it means to be Black in the world. Prof, when many of us encountered you, you, of course, are no longer at Fisk. You had cycled through a few places. I know you did some visiting work at Dartmouth and other places, but you had ended up taking residence at Haverford College. Mm-hmm. And I was, of course, at Temple at the time in graduate school and wrestling with this idea of Afrocentricity. Mm-hmm. And it was the only place in the world you get a PhD in Afro-American Studies. So that's why we were there.
Right.
But, I came across a conference that was held in April 1987 at the University of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Your friend Patrick Bellegarde Smith and one another. They tried to define what does it mean to do Black studies, or what was being called Africology at the time.
Right.
And there were two names at Haverford that those of us who were sitting in the Afrocentric, quote unquote, capital in the academy, but still trying to figure out what does it mean to have a discipline called Africology, and just how do you even approach this? There was Vernon Dixon.
Yes, sir.
And there was Lucius T. Outlaw. And when I eventually got my hands on Africology, normative theory, I said, here it is. You started mapping out, well, I think what you call it, architectonic. You archaeology, genealogy from Michel Foucault, you got meta science, but you're driven by this question. And I still use that article, by the way, Prof, in my introduction to African Studies class. I asked these young people a question: how do we even undertake the study of Africana? And so let me just ask you, for all of us sitting here listening to you, how do we organize even thinking about Blackness? You've spent your entire career thinking about it. What is Blackness? Who are we? Give us some sense of how you think about the world through those issues.
So another seminal text for me is Peter Berger and Thomas Luxman's The Social Construction of Reality. So, some of my graduate students who've been close to me will tell you, well, look, if you're going to go study with Lou, you got to go read Berger and Luckman first. Social construction of reality. And there's a whole lot in there. But one of the fundamental things there is, when we think about it, all of us come into the world and are socialized into some notion of who we are. Other people give us names. We don't name ourselves. We are in families we don't make ourselves. We are introduced into institutions we don't choose ourselves. So there's a whole lot of making of us that goes on by way of other people, many of whom who care deeply about us, who shape us in keeping with various agendas that they have, et cetera. And we're in this complicated world in the US, white supremacy, enforced, et cetera, all that's about. And we have to, wherein we are supposed to be in keeping with that project, less than fully human being, deficient being, et cetera. And then always there have been Black people struggling against that to say, no, we're about a lot more than that. You're not going to tell us who we are, or you can tell us who we are, but we will not, most of us will not live by or identify with who you would have us be. And the Black Power movement was another eruption of, no, we're going to redefine ourselves in some very powerful ways. And I was deeply impacted and deeply influenced by that. Now that means there's another part of this, and that is that what it means to be is not written into our genomes.
Mm-hmm.
It's not coded into our genomes.
Mm-hmm.
What it means to be is determined by human beings ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so in some sense, so, well, what does it mean to be Black? It is, well, what do we who take ourselves to be Black, what do we think that means?
Yes.
We're in some sense self-defining in that respect. Now, we're in, if you will, dialectical interaction with lots of other peoples and even among ourselves about those who are colored, Negro, Black, African, etc., trying to work that through. But it's a process of self-definition. And then the question is, can you give it institutional grounding? Can you give it social grounding, etc.? One of the things that became really interesting to me was, okay, how if you take up this self-definitional project, what does that mean for the production of what you take to be knowledge about yourself and about those like you, about the world? So the Black Studies Project became an interesting challenge for me. How do you set about creating knowledge production enterprises in keeping with an aspiration not only to be free from oppression, but also to flourish?
Yes.
To be creatively flourishing. And Du Bois was a tremendous inspiration in wrestling with those kinds of issues for me. Mm-hmm. But the intellectual challenge is a formidable one.
And no question.
It is a formidable one. And how, within the context of these institutions, predominantly white institutions, particularly, which is where so much of the Black studies effort initially emerged,
yes,
how can you fulfill this project, this aspiration, in a way by which you can also survive the critical scrutiny of those who don't, many of whom don't believe what you're doing has any credibility whatsoever, right? But you're determined to do it.
That's incredibly powerful. I mean, on so many levels, you have never, well, let me rephrase that. You've always carried forward the institutions that shaped you. So you've been reading how you engage with Michel Foucault and genealogy. You're not drawing from Foucault for your cultural grounding any more than Du Bois wasn't. You're drawing on Starkville. You're drawing on Fisk. You're drawing on all those collectives. You're drawing on those, and then in those spaces that you have found yourself, when you raise that challenge, and you've written about this as well, the constant attack on Black Studies departments to find their legitimacy, you've still managed in some way to survive, but also to thrive, and then to train others without having any of that grounded in this respect for the places that you found yourselves in institutionally, that displaces that grounding you've written and taught about your whole life in terms of where that greatness comes from, where that Black greatness comes from. Yours was the first article, quite frankly, and of course that's what, and you were so gracious to let me come over and hang out with you in West Philly, come out there to Harvard and sit in your house and talk through this.
That's right.
You know what I mean? Yours was the first article I read that took on Karenga, took on Asante respectfully, agreed that it could be agreement, and at the same time said, we've still got to ground this in the lived experiences of African people. We don't have to go back to Africa, but we must include it. We shouldn't reject enslavement. We must consider it. What you raise, even a question, let me ask you this question right quick. You raise a question, you say, you know, why didn't Black people just turn into perpetual terrorists and attack this country and attack any place we found ourselves in?
That's right.
You know, and I wonder if you talk to us a little bit about how you think of the cultural groundings and traditions we have that can't be explained or understood without grounding it in the lived experiences of Black people. Could you talk a little bit about?
Sure.
Yeah, please.
So one of the things that my maternal grandmother used to say to me, and this was up in Mississippi, she said, you know, son, The only way you can keep somebody in a ditch is you have to get in the ditch with them. Don't get in the ditch with the white man. And I should think about, so what does this mean? Right. And, I think about this, right? So think of of an enslaved Negro woman working in the big house, preparing food for the white family.
Yes.
Now, she could say, well, I'm going to end this terrorism over our life because I'm going to poison the whole damn family.
Yes, sir.
But she doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
She could say, this white woman had a baby. This baby's going to grow up and they're going to will us slaves to the baby. I'm going to short circuit that. I'm going to kill their children.
Yes, sir.
Enslavement was cross-generational. So she could say, I'm going to disrupt this cross-generational enslavement because I'm going to kill the next generation. But instead, we've got Black women, in some cases, nourishing those white children from the milk of our own breast.
No
and
question.
so I have to ask myself, now, wait a minute. By what reasoning did this woman decide not to poison the white family? Now, some say, well, she was afraid. Of what?
Of what?
Of what? You think it was fear? Let's allow for the possibility that she thought it wasn't the right thing to do, right? That she's making an ethical decision.
Interesting.
And that she's thinking. So
interesting.
She gets raped by a white male.
Yes.
Within a few weeks, she knows her body. She knows she's pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
Now she's got to worry. Do I bring this child to term? If I do, what are the other women in the slave community going to think about me? The older Black women in a little bit of time are going to start saying, girl, that dress ain't fit you like it used to. What's going on?
That's right.
When she starts showing, what's the white woman in the big house going to say?
Huh.
Why are you pregnant? Who's the daddy? And if she has a Black man in the slave community, what's he going to say? Particularly when that child is born and the skin pigmentation of that child don't look nothing like him.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for literally 9 months, she's got to face these questions as she's carrying that child and ask herself, do I abort this child or do I bring it into this world where I can't protect it? It may be sold out from under me. It will be my child, but I can't even protect it. And yet, over and over again, these women brought children into a world and nurtured them as best they could. But day after day while pregnant, carried that child, hummed their songs, prayed to their Lord, and endured this to bring others in the world, even though they couldn't protect them. And then tried to say, but one day, child, but one day, child. And you are not to conduct yourself in the way these people did. You are to be different. And I'm saying they had to think through existential conditions and raise questions. What should I do?
Yes.
I don't need to go to France to study existentialism.
No, sir.
I can look at and ask the question, how did Black folk wrestle with existence day in and day out and make judgments about what to do? Think of those people on the slave ships who decided not to commit suicide. What went into their thinking? What did they have to look forward to?
Well, probably one of the many beautiful things about your intellectual work is that you make room for both choices.
That's right.
That is, because we think about the Igbo women in Montpelier who very likely poisoned James Madison's grandfather. We think about Martin Delaney's Blake, where these arguments over should we run, should we stay? He's literally critiquing religion in Blake, page by page.
Right.
But the beautiful thing about your concept of Blackness and the way that you've worked is that you don't allow anybody expressing their existential grappling with what it means to be Black to leave the circle. Just like Nikki Giovanni kissed you on the cheek, you don't say, okay, now if you kill this cat or if you smother this baby, if you poison these people, this is part of the argument. We need, I think about Cedric Robinson, who says we need a higher moral standard. Michael Gomez, who says we didn't hold white people the same standard we held. But you don't let any of that off of this table, Prof. That is the genius, it seems to me, one of the geniuses of your concept of Blackness. Let's pause for a second. We want to come back and finish this final segment and continue this conversation and bring in one of your guiding spirits and fellow alum from Fisk, W.E.B. Du Bois. I'm thinking about that talk he gave at Johnson C. Smith, Whither Now and Why, where he said, they're going to change these laws, and then you got to decide who you are in the world. And,
really are.
And then gave you the baton. He said, let me get this fellow Fisk guy the baton. You got to answer that. I'm going to Africa. Anyway, when we come back with Lucius the Outlaw Jr., we are going to ask him the absurdly unfair question of whether now and why Black people should go, given what he has framed for us so far. Back in a moment at the Black Table on the Black Star Network. It's time to be smart.
Roland Martin's doing this every day.
Oh, no punches!
Thank you, Roland Martin, for always giving voice to the issues.
Look for Roland Martin in the whirlwind, to quote Marcus Garvey again.
The video looks phenomenal, so I'm really excited to see it on my big screen.
Support this man, Black media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
I got to defer to the brilliance of Dr. Carr and to the brilliance of the Black Star Network.
I am rolling with Roland all the way.
Honored to be on a show that you own. A Black man owns the show.
Folks, Black Star Network is here.
I'm real revolutionary right now. Roland was amazing on that.
Stay Black. I love y'all.
I can't commend you enough about this platform that you've created for us to be able to share who we are, what we're doing in the world, and the impact that we're having.
Let's be smart. Bring your eyeballs home.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared. You dig?
Welcome back to the Black Table. We're in our final segment today with Professor Lucius T. Outlaw Jr. Prof, when we left, you had sketched out for us this ethical standard of Blackness that Black folk have lived with, grappling with the questions of oppression and enslavement in our recent memory. But I'm wondering now, as I said, as we left, you have just, you've informed us you taught your last class at Vanderbilt, and I imagine the community is grateful because that means you're going to spend that much more time with them and the family. But you did it on the campus, partially, that you yourself attended as a student and came back as a faculty member. And W.E.B. Du Bois, of course, you say you had your students start at the Du Bois statue there at Fisk. W.E.B. Du Bois raised that question just before leaving for Ghana. Black school teachers and whether now and why, well, the social science configuration.
That's right.
You know, and so I wonder, where some of your thoughts on where you think we are, how you think we should be thinking and acting now, what you see in terms of social movements, because as Du Bois said, once they change the laws and desegregate, then you're going to have to answer the deeper questions of race and culture. And you've spent your entire career doing that. Could you help us? Where do you think we are today in terms of trying to answer those questions? Any of it?
It's, as it has always been, it's particularly precarious. And for all of the precariousness, the craziness, et cetera, you know, one way I put it is we got hit with two pandemics recently. One was a biological pandemic caused by a virus, COVID-19. The other was a political pandemic. And the agent was Trump that gave rise to Trumpism. And the confluence of those two pandemics had lasting impact on the body politic of this country, both literally and figuratively. And of course, democracy is in question again. And it's another question of Black folk going to have to save democracy in the United States yet again. Right? So it is precarious. But life has always been precarious for folks of African descent, African and African descent on the continent and in the rest of the world after the encounter with folks from Europe and white supremacy, et cetera. So it's precarious. And now we're facing some serious questions. I was just thinking the other day, one of the things that has been deeply bothering to me is the Black Lives Matter movement, because I asked the question, which Black lives matter to whom, when? What I have in mind is, we saw the response from a lot in this Black Studies movement when Michael Brown was killed.
Yes.
Now, it wasn't very long after that when a young lady from Chicago who was in a high school band that marched at the second inauguration of Barack Obama, she went back home to Chicago and she was killed by a bullet from a shooting in Chicago.
Yes.
Now, to the best of my memory, and I may be wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, Greg, but there was no lifting up of the killing of that young girl as a movement around the questions of Black Lives Matter. Am I right about that?
That's right. Not comparable. And to the degree that it was raised, to your long-term observations about Blackness, it was within Black communities in Chicago. Our friend Jeremiah Wright, Father Michael Fligger, and it did not spark nationwide or international outrage. You're absolutely right, Prof.
And so the question becomes, for me, which Black lives matter to whom and why? And it seems as though there were those for whom the taking of a Black life matters if it is done by a white police officer, but not if by someone who's Black. And I'm like, wait a minute now. I thought these lives were to matter, should matter.
That's right.
Should they not matter? It is though we're literally not politically allowed to say, look, the taking of Black lives by Black folk is unacceptable.
That's right.
Well, you're giving aid and comfort to white folk. No white racist ever waited for me to endorse them before they became a racist. They don't wait for me to give them endorsements for this.
That's right.
So there are some deep issues here that I think we've got to wrestle with, and that if we're going to say they matter, we've got to make them matter across all registers, all aspects of our shared life together.
We're almost out of time, but I want to actually ask you this in the context of your life and your work. You talked about your parents worried about what might happen at Fisk, but you also written and talked about how your father wouldn't get off the sidewalk when you were a little boy and the white man wanted him to move.
Yeah.
Where do you think this, do you think that Black violence against Black people would have been tolerated in the community of your parents or you growing up in those all Black excellent institutions? So if that's the truth, then when did it change and why? And how can we get back to that standard that you talked about, that ethic?
I think, I would say crucial insights into this are to be had by reading two books. One is called The Declining Significance of Race. The other is The Truly Disadvantaged.
The great William Julius Wilson.
Right.
Yes.
And one of the things that William Julius Wilson explores is, and this is pertinent to the Du Bois phenomenon, when Wilson says, okay, you got so-called desegregation, you got the movement of jobs out of the Northeast and the Midwest to the South and to the West, et cetera. And with desegregation, you get the relocation of the Black middle class away from those neighborhoods, like rather than living on the campus of Fisk or around Fisk, I live in Green Hills, right?
Yes.
Now, one of the things Wilson explores is, what does it mean when you don't have day in and day out those living examples of certain kinds of achievement, comportment, et cetera, that you grow up around when all Black people are living together. Like in my neighborhood, there was a group of boys on one side of town they were going to start a gang called the Red Hat Gang. My father and some other Black men got together and had a conversation. Black men from my side of town and the other side of town where these boys gathered. These Black men got together, had a conversation, and then said to those young men from the other side of town, there ain't gonna be but one gang, and we're that gang. We ain't having no gang.
Now,
these are young boys. They would go to St. Louis in the summer, Chicago in the summer. They had a taste of the gang culture. They're gonna come back to Starkville. They're gonna form them a gang in Starkville. These black men got together, met and discussed it, and then went and started telling these boys and their father, and concluded, there ain't gonna be but one gang, and we that gang. Y'all ain't starting no gang here. Period.
There's the answer, Prof. You've given us the answer. I mean, it's not the academics studying the problem. It's not the policymakers trying to. It is literally going to come from those same community formations you grew up in and have written and taught about your whole life. Now, how can we repair? We have to be able to repair it, right? I mean,
we can.
The precarity of Black life that you talked about. How do we approach it?
Well, again, if you read what Du Bois says and whether or not, now look at what he says. We must have Black schools, Black colleges, Black literary tradition, Black this, and one of the fundamentals he says is we must have families through which we inculcate children in certain kinds of ways. Now that's challenging for me because 2 of my 3 sons are married to young white women, and those are my 4 grandchildren.
Yes, sir.
So now I have to help them understand, as I said to one of my students who took the Du Bois seminar, which was a profound experience for him, you ain't responsible for enslavement and white supremacy, but you are responsible for what you do. You now have the responsibility and the opportunity to redefine what whiteness means, to rehabilitate whiteness.
Now after that, we won't get whiteness. Has to be remade, reconstructed.
It has to be remade.
It has to be, something has to happen to it, and we can't do that.
Right. And so I say to people, one of my essays is a rehabilitation of whiteness. So I say, if Black folk can take the notion of Blackness and turn it from a negative to a positive, which is what we have done, white folk can rehabilitate what whiteness means. We don't have to eliminate whiteness. I have no desire to eliminate white people from the world, but this whole thing about replacement, silly argument, that's not my goal at all. What I do want, what I have tried to do in my teaching, working in predominantly white institutions, is to say, it is not in my best interest for white folk to have institutions of higher education only to themselves and to socialize another generation of white folk without intervention from Black folk and other non-white people. That is not in my best interest. It's too dangerous. It's in my interest to help young white folk come to a critical understanding of what whiteness has meant and to have the courage and the creativity to redefine what whiteness can be going forward.
Man, that's, you know what? Whew. As the young people say, you just dropped some jewels, brother. That's a fact right there. I mean, in fact, let us take in about 60 seconds or a minute if we can do it in a minute. You now stepping out of that day-to-day valence that you've been in now for, was it 52 years? You said
52 years
as a college professor, and man, now we know for all your brilliance coming out of the family and community you came out of, like so many Black men and women. You can't spell retire. I'm sorry. That's not one of the words. So I'm just wondering, we all want to know what's next in terms of your work. We know you somewhere working on something like a musician. You never stop playing. So what you working on, Prof, as you now have
over the next 6 months, I'm going to work on a project that is, and I just wrote to someone the other day and said, nope, I can't do that essay for that special issue of the journal. I'm going to turn my attention to doing something I've been incubating for a couple of decades. And it's to work on one essay by Ralph Ellison. One essay by Ellison called "A Little Man at Cheahaw Station." That's all I want to say.
Hey, we can't bring back the split, brother. That little man at Cheahaw Station, that Tuskegee article. Look, y'all, I can't tell you. Look, everybody, when is Kendrick gonna drop the next? No. This one right here.
That's what I'm gonna work on.
This is what you. What? Go ahead, bro, please. Oh.
The other thing is, as of July 1st, I will be an active member of the Haverford Corporation. The corporation is the legal entity that owns Haverford College and is responsible for overseeing the college. They delegate the oversight to the board of managers, who delegates management to the president and his staff. But the corporation continues to oversee, asking the question, is the college maintaining its commitment to Quaker values and principles. I've now been voted onto the corporation, and I will be doing that for the next 3 or 4 years.
I'm really without words, because if memory serves me correctly, you did a turn on Fisk's trustee board.
No, I was never on the board.
Oh, I thought you were on the board. I don't know how they did you not to be the president of Fisk. That's a whole nother. We had to bring you back.
You know what happened when Du Bois came and was asked to give a talk, and he talked about when the last white president was still there, and he told it was time to go in the 1930s.
The attorney Salenti, no question.
And they said, we don't want him back here no more.
That's right.
So I weighed in when Hazel Lear was president and said, this is all wrong-headed. Y'all should be doing this. And so I've literally been persona non grata in certain.
Lord have mercy.
But that's okay.
You know what? That is okay, Prof. I mean, you know, you have labored not only for our people, but for humanity for so long and continue to do it. This is wonderful news to hear about Haverford. And this little man at Chihuahua Station, I'm sure my brother and another one of your many apprentices, Larry Jackson, is going to be very happy to hear that you've taken on that essay from Shadow and Act, because in so many ways you are the product of that little man.
Oh, it's a powerful essay. It is one of the finest essays I've ever read in my life.
Oh, you're going to make me go somewhere and sit with that for a couple hours this afternoon. Listen, you all, if you're not familiar with Lucius Outlaw, you need to get his book on race and philosophy, Critical Social Theory and the Interests of Black Folk. Check him out. He's all over social media now because of YouTube and everywhere you can see his lectures. But we want to thank you, Prof, for spending some time with us. And please, you have an open invitation. We want you back to have more conversation here.
Well, let's be alert. There's something coming out in November that's going to might be of interest to you. You know, Jeffrey Stewart did this.
Oh, of course.
Did this book on Elaine Locke.
On Elaine Locke, no question. You know what?
I called it a deeply troubled book.
Woo, you gonna do the review?
Well, I've done an essay. It's not a review because halfway through the book, I refused to read it any further.
My God. And
so then the editor of the journal said, well, can you write an essay about why you won? I said, yes, I can. That essay is coming out in Boundary 2 in November.
Oh, in Boundary 2, of course. Ronald Judy and those cats up there in Pittsburgh. Oh, man. You know what? Hey, y'all, the Black Table. Look, we're building this, Prof, this week by week. This is the type of engagement that I suspect what we want to model this on in part is the kind of engagement that you all really developed in the 60s and 70s. Mm-hmm. And an essay like this, you all, you know, Jeffrey Stewart, we had him at Howard. He came, of course, he did a lot of research there. Won a national award. Right. In fact, he had just been announced when we had him come and do the talk. And so, but nobody, look, the cipher is real. Nobody comes with universal phrase. We got to get a guy in the Black community, whether it be the basketball court, the spades game, or the book. We got to have a conversation. Cannot wait to read that, Prof. Thank you. And it's going to be in Boundary 2, the journal Boundary 2, you all, the number 2.
I can share it with you before it even comes out if you wish.
Man, I would love that. Now I know the rest of y'all like, wait a minute. No, y'all just gonna have to wait.
Gonna have to wait.
As the young people say less. But yeah, Prof, listen, man, thank you so much for spending some time with us, Prof.
Thank you for having me. I've been honored by Greg, and you have been admired by me, respected by me, for bringing me into your trust and respect. Thank you. But
no, that's my honor. It's the least we can do. You received the baton, so we're gonna keep running with you.
Thank you.
Love you, brother. Talk to you soon.
Like to. All
right. We will now come back in a moment, and we'll clear the table and prepare for next week, the Black Table. Back in a moment.
We welcome you to the launch of the Mass Poor People's Low Wage Assembly and Moral March on Washington, D.C., June 18, 2022.
We are a new, unsettling force, and we are powerful. A new, unsettling force, and we are here.
We're rising up to demonstrate the compelling power that we, poor and low-income people, have to reconstruct society from the bottom up.
And we need to do it with the loudest voices possible, the biggest actions possible.
Because we know that there is no scarcity in this land. The only scarcity is the moral will to do what's right.
Hold on, just a little while longer.
We are those with sub-minimum wage jobs who can't afford sky-high rent.
People with disabilities are the fastest growing minority group.
It's crazy to me that in 2021, it's still legal for workplaces to pay a sub-minimum wage to people with disabilities.
There are still so much trial and tribulations that we go through as Indigenous people. We can't get a decent wage to sustain ourselves, nor can we get adequate housing.
Veterans across this nation say enough is enough. We can't pat essential workers on the back on one day and then cut their health care the next day.
Health is a political choice.
What more do I need to do to prove that my voice is just as valuable as anyone else's?
There are still forces in denial that would try to slow walk our transition to a clean economy and a just future for us all.
We have an immoral system run by immoral people.
But together we walk and we fight.
It's time for a change. Reconstruyamos esta gran nación.
See, we are people of resilience. As we fight these interlocking injustices together,
when we work together, mobilize together, and rise together, we become a voice for the voiceless, and we become an agent of change in a time where great change is needed.
We need the third Reconstruction to ensure that deaf people, people with disabilities, and all people can have the right to live and to thrive.
We know what they are doing, but the question is, what are we going to do? Reconstruction begins when we change our mentality and say it's time for you to get your foot off of my neck.
Justice is coming soon. Hey, do you believe that I'm today?
Welcome back to the Black Table here at the Black Star Network. I'm Greg Carr, honored to be your host. And today we have had a very powerful conversation with one of the greatest minds we have, the great Lucius T. Outlaw Jr. In his essay, Africology, Normative Theory, published in the book On Race and Philosophy, Dr. Outlaw writes this about the nature of us thinking about Blackness. He says, it is a matter of perspective, the frame through which we structure and go about our work. The consequences, of course, are enormous. At the stake is the safety of negotiating the mind field of life on the way to a chosen destination. Norms to govern theorizing about norms for social life are themselves part of social life and are likewise conditioned by the choices of destination and route. No amount of theorizing can eliminate the risks involved in choosing, either in social life or in theorizing. Thus, we must not be pretentious about what is to come from an attempted refinement of Black studies into a more mature and socially responsible discipline of Africology. We've spent an hour with a man who has made some powerful choices over the course of his life to date, and we are all the better for them. Thank you, Professor Outlaw. And join us next week, same time at the Black Table.